For this week's readings, we're taking a look at the idea of metaphysics, which is a fairly complex concept given the fact that you have probably never encountered it before. Metaphysics is the name of the concept we use to structure our experience of reality and interpret it in a meaningful way. As the reading notes, facts are meaningless because their meaning is something that we impose on them. It's not part of the facts themselves. That's why people can look at the same facts but have entirely different interpretations of those facts. If the interpretation was in the facts themselves, there couldn't be disagreement. Here is a fun fact: all data is biased, and there is an infinite number of ways to interpret that same data. Data is biased because in collecting data, we have to make assumptions about what is and is not relevant, because there is an infinite number of potential data points to collect, so we have to limit the data set. Any selection we make ultimately represents an infinitesimal segment of all available data, and the selection itself introduces bias for things you think are and are not relevant. Case in point, the last time your power went out, did you check the position of Venus relative to Uranus? No? Why not? I'll tell you, because you made the assumption that these bits of data are irrelevant to your lack of electricity. That means that you excluded almost all the data in the universe based on your assumption that it's not important. Second, there is this infinite number of ways to interpret the data because interpretation is not part of the data. It's a system we choose to use to make sense of it. We can split up this class by gender, race, age, height, weight, eye color, hair color, shoe size, number of cells currently undergoing mitosis in your body, etc. And what's the right way to split it up? Well, it might depend on what we're trying to do with the data. But fact of the matter is, every one of those ways of splitting up the class is functional. It's just a question of what it is that we want to do. So here's a fun one. You, me, and all humans with functional eyeballs observe that the sun is moving across the sky. That's data. Since before written language, that data was interpreted as meaning that we're in the center of the universe, and the rest of it rotates around us. Since about 1543, however, we switched that up so that we're the ones moving and the sun is standing still. Same data, different interpretation. That should be good enough to demonstrate why we can't just look at the facts. We use metaphysics because, unlike animals, we have a near infinite range of potential for what we can be. This applies to individuals and societies. You are a child of your mother and your father. That's two different relations. You may be a sibling, you may be an older one, a younger one, or a middle one, or some combination of all that. You may be the same or different gender than your siblings, which will also change the relationship. You are a student, which is three different relations all at the same time. You are related to the school as an institution, to other students, and to professors. You are already engaged in thousands of these various relations, and you are constantly juggling them in order to try to make them work. Not only that, they have to work in relation to your other relations and to your other goals. So what does it mean for a relationship to work? Well, that depends on your understanding of values, meanings, and their hierarchy. There are constant tensions in your relations because each relation you are in makes demands on your time and effort. Which one do you prioritize, and how much do you prioritize it by? What's the right balance between, for example, work, friends, and family? There isn't a single answer here. Instead, the answer depends on how you understand the world and your place in it. The same is true for individuals and for societies. And this is where metaphysics really comes in. Metaphysics is an understanding of the world you bring to the table, which tells you the order, relations, interpretations, meanings, values, and their hierarchical structure. Additionally, metaphysics then tells you how to harmonize these ideas. And you have to harmonize them because everything you do and are should always be in the service of your highest value, as given by your metaphysical ideas. Harmony is not about hugging trees. It's about functionality, stability, dynamism, sustainability, and scalability. You may have noticed that a number of these metaphysical ideas look a lot like religious ones. That's because they are similar, not religious. In fact, Carl Jung said that your highest moral value, the thing that sits at the top of your metaphysics and directs everything else, is your God. Now that may sound funny, especially if you're not a fan of religion, but Jung's point works because he's not talking about some beard in the sky. That idea, by the way, comes from Greek and Norse mythologies, and Christianity does not have that image in its text. That was creatively added by artists later, and no other major religion has that idea either. If we look at the idea of God, God as an entity provides direction, motivation, do's and don'ts, meaning, interpretation, and is the source of sacrifice of the present for the future. But the highest moral value of a metaphysical system provides those same things. Obviously, if one is religious, God is that highest moral value. But if we're talking about an atheist, it turns out that their highest moral value does the same thing for them. In other words, it acts like God because we treat it the way that a legitimately religious person treats God. Let's look at a simplified example here. A person whose deepest desire is to be a doctor. That desire gives them the direction of what to be and what to do in life. It gives them the motivation to work for that goal. It gives them a long series of do's and don'ts. Do study these subjects, prep like this, take these exams, do these extracurriculars, don't do these kinds of risky behaviors, don't slack off. That goal also gives meaning to the things that they see, because everything becomes categorized as gets me to my goal, option A, option B is neutral, and option C is hurts my goals. These are values, and they allow us to interpret the world in a way that lets us functionally navigate it towards our goal. Finally, the goal of being a doctor requires sacrifice. You literally give up years of your life, nights, weekends, time with friends, family, significant others, in order to attempt to get into med school. Plenty of people skip on things like marriage and kids until after they have succeeded. You sacrifice parties, fun, popularity, and youth, all in the hope of becoming a doctor. By the way, I mean sacrifice as in you intentionally and purposefully kill off or get rid of something of great value to you as an offering to ensure a better chance of the future being better than the present. And that term better there just means closer to your goal. Med students kill their present for a chance at the future. And there's no guarantee of that future. Only some 38% of students who apply to med schools get in. Some don't make it through. And even if you do, well, people die every day. Someone gets their degree today and dies tomorrow. Some make it only to be cut down by some tragedy or another. The backstory of Dr. Strange, the superhero, is a fairly good example there. Ultimately, the students who are sacrificing their present are giving it up for something that doesn't exist. There's no guarantee that they will graduate. In fact, they're working towards an imaginary diploma and hope that it becomes a real diploma at some magical time in the future. There is no guarantee that they get into med schools, and they're working towards imaginary letters of acceptance. They're working at becoming imaginary professionals in a future that no one guarantees, with the hope that when they get there one day, it will all have been worth it. Compare that to the idea of believing in God and heaven. It's more or less the same idea with a different start date. But how can med students do this? Because their metaphysical idea of their highest goal allows them to interpret reality in a way that makes those sacrifices meaningful. And the same thing happens with religious ideas. This is an important point to note because it seems that religious ideas, which predate all signs of other complex social organization, tapped into something that seems pretty crucial for humans. Now, can all of this be done without religion? Well, maybe. But the point isn't whether some religion is true or not. The point is what it tells us about us, that these ideas are so crucial in the way that we structure the world. These metaphysical ideas are crucial to having a society. You can't have a society if the members are not aimed in the same general direction. That means the same top goal, the same do's and don'ts, etc. When you have that, then you can organize. Societies use this to build their core social ideas, to establish laws, to move the society in a way they believe is the right direction. And this unity of purpose, at least generally speaking, is what allows us to undertake social projects that require us all to pitch in. The pyramids are such a project. Wars in general are such projects. Building cities is such a project. Space exploration and the man on the moon was such a project. These are massive undertakings that only work if we're all pulling in the same direction. There is a problem of whether our metaphysical systems make sense. This one's tricky because metaphysics are not things you can touch and measure. These are narratives about the world. And narratives are not subject to the same kinds of testing as physical objects because they are metaphysical, right? Beyond physics. But we do have two tools at our disposal. The first is internal coherence. Do the ideas of this metaphysical theory work together? Do the implications of these ideas work together? Do they create logical inconsistencies? How does the system hold up when we ask tough questions? You can think of internal coherence in terms of movies. A coherent movie has a world that makes sense. It doesn't matter if the world is not at all like our world. It doesn't matter that it has dragons, hobbits, and elves. The question is, if the world like that existed, would it make sense? Now, if you have a system that is internally coherent, then you can go ahead and look at its external coherence. And that really answers the question, how well does a metaphysical system map onto our experiences in the actual world? Does it affirm our experience? Does it tell us that our experiences may be wrong? If our experience is wrong, why is it wrong? This is more like asking whether a movie makes sense in our world. One way to understand how this metaphysical system business works is through the Struktura system. This is the image you saw in our reading. It's a low resolution one, meaning that it's bare bones version. The key features are these four relations and their division into the left side, which is descriptive, and the right side, which is normative. Also remember that things on the left are things that deal with the greater than human element, so things that are not inside of physical human experience, while the right side is all about the human experience. The metaphysical highest moral value is what goes on top. That greater than human element is just the metaphysical highest moral value. But notice that the whole left side is things we have to assume to be true. That's a starting assumption so that we can get other ideas off the ground. For example, it's like the assumption that you will be a doctor. Unless you first make that assumption, you are going nowhere. Additionally, there's no way to prove or disprove that assumption. The best we have are the external and external coherence claims, but those are not absolutely certain either. The relation at the top is the definition of that highest moral value. It's kind of like asking, what exactly is this thing that we hold in highest regard? In religious systems, for example, it's not enough to just say that the top is God. What is the definition of that God? What is the understanding of God that the religion offers? There's a lot of difference between Zeus and Tao. Without this, the system won't do much work for you. So you want to make sure that you clarify things as much as possible. The way that our highest moral values relate to us is the list of implications of that highest value for how we should behave. It's a list that told us what is required of us if we want to have that value. We saw this earlier and should remember that these implications give us not only the values but also their hierarchy, because whenever you make a decision, it is based on a hierarchy of values. So for any action, you should be able to ask a person why they or their society did it, and they should be able to point back to one or more of these points for explanation and justification. The right side of the circle is things that we should do. These are things that are not true yet, but we need to do to bring the values we hold to life. Under the human element, you should have an infinite set of possible relations, like we mentioned at the beginning, all of which are governed by the values we derive from the thing we take as God. How should you be as a child, as a sibling, as a student, as a friend, as a whatever is found here. So is the answer to the question of how you should treat things like nature, intellectual property, rights of animals, recycling, biology. Literally every relation you can conceivably have with anything other than the greater than human element is found here. The way we relate to the highest moral value as individuals or societies is all about actualizing the implications of the thing that sits on top. And this is the human element to greater than human element relation all the way on the right. And it's a kind of analysis of the finished product and of the consequences of your action. Your initial assumptions give all these ideas and values, and if you do them right, the outcome should be the life and society you were aiming for. But if you screw up, it all goes down the drain. If you step back, you can see that the Struktura is just a neat visual representation of metaphysics. And we'll be coming back a lot to these ideas throughout the semester. Every time we explore a new idea, you need to ask yourself, what kind of metaphysical system is required for implementing it? Plenty of, quote, great ideas in one system are absolutely terrible in others, because the value of an idea comes from the way we understand the world, and that's based on our highest moral value. By learning how to navigate metaphysical spaces, how they're structured, and how to understand the values they bring, we can engage in a serious discussion. We learn to look past the how and focus on the why of the choices and action. This lets us dig into various ideas far better than before. Now we can track them back to the source, we can see how the source of those ideas works, what else it might have to offer, and whether it actually supports the choices and actions that were made down the line. We can also test the functionality of these value-giving ideas in their own context and in ours. If we learn how to do this, we can see problems coming before they become problems. We might be able to resolve them, or maybe we have to adjust our entire way of understanding the world. In either case, by anticipating these issues, we buy ourselves time to thoroughly examine these ideas and their implications and their sources and possible solutions long before the problem starts causing us trouble. In this way, we're responding to the problem instead of reacting to it. That means that we're less likely to end up making catastrophic choices on the fly because there is no time to think. You engage in something like this, though a much simpler version, when you have a hurricane evacuation plan or a fire escape plan or any of the other solutions to serious problems that have to be worked out in advance. Metaphysics just allows you to do this with the way that you're structuring your life and the way your society structures itself. While a hurricane will do serious damage, the rebuilding process is pretty straightforward. When a metaphysical system goes down, societies have crumbled,